Hello and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to be demonstrating some techniques for sewing beads on your fabric. It's an elegant way to embellish your projects. So let's go ahead and get started. These are some of the supplies that I tend to use when I'm going to do some hand beading. So of course I have my fabric, and you can really bead on any type of fabric that you want. If it's kind of difficult to handle, it's slippery, it's silky, I do use an embroidery hoop, just to kind of make the fabric a little bit more manageable to use. Also, I have a beading needle, and this needle is definitely skinnier than a regular sharp needle, which makes it handy for going through the really small beads. I have beading thread here. Now this is a nylon thread. You definitely want to pick something that matches with your fabric. I know there's not a lot of options with the beading thread if you kind of have a limited craft selection. But just try to do the best you can. I'm going to go ahead and use a white thread so it's a little bit more contrasting to my fabric and it'll be a little bit easier for you to see. Next I have my beads. Now these are seed beads and they're really small beads, but of course beads come in all different types and sizes and stuff. The only thing you really should consider is the weight of the bead and then what your design is going to be. Obviously, if you do tons of heavy beads and you have this very elaborate design, it can affect the draping of your garment and the fabric. So you definitely want to take that into account. I have embroidery scissors, and these will help me get a close cut when I'm trimming my threads. So those are the things that you're going to need. We're going to go ahead and get started and show you some of the stitches. Alright, so I'm getting ready to start sewing. I just want to point out with your fabric, it's very important to pre-treat your fabric. So however you plan on cleaning your fabric after your garment is complete, you do that with your fabric ahead of time. So if it's going to shrink, it's done before you start beading it. Also, if you plan to do a very elaborate and ornate design with your beading, maybe it would be better to do that before you cut out your garment pieces. So you do all your beading first, then you can lay out your pattern pieces or whatever pieces you need, then cut it out. Because with a lot of beading, there tends to be some shrinkage, so you can take care of that before you cut out your pieces. If you're just doing something simple like delicate work and you're doing trim, you can do that after the garment is already done. So I have my fabric in my hoop to get started, and I'm not stretching my fabric, I'm just making sure that it's taut and it's nice and flat for me to work with. I have my thread and my needle already. On one end I'm going to tie a knot, so this end I'm just going to create a loop, and then I'm going to bring the end through the loop, and that'll give me a knot. And you can cut off the end of the tail if you want, or you can wait and do it later after you've done some stitches. I usually wait. So there's my knot there. I get my beads ready that I'm going to use. I just put them in a shallow dish or lid so they're easy to get. I don't try to grab them out of the bag because then it starts getting messy. Same thing if it's on the table. So now that I'm prepared, I can go ahead and start sewing. The first thing I'm going to do is show you how to sew on an individual bead, and I pretty much always start my stitches the same way. So I'm coming from the right side to the wrong side. I'm pretty much always looking at the right side of my fabric when I'm doing this. And it's going to stop once I hit the knot. If you want to do an elaborate design, you can use chalk or a fabric marker to draw on the right side of your fabric, and that way you have something to use as a guideline. So I'm going to do an anchor stitch or safety stitch by grabbing a little bit of my fabric next to where my thread is coming out. It's going to create this loop, and I'm going to go through the loop and pull that tight, and then it's also going to hold my knot into place. It's on the wrong side. So if you want, you can do that twice if you really want to make sure it's going to stay. So I'm going to grab a bead with my needle, and then I'm going to go down in my fabric. I'm not going exactly in the same spot where my thread is coming up, but just pretty close to it. It really depends on how big your bead is. And then I'm going to pull it all the way through. So now the bead is secured with one stitch, but just to make sure it's really going to be secured, I'm going to come up again right next to it and go through it again. So I'm going to go through the bead, and then I'm going to go back down on the other side and pull it all the way through. Now if I want to do another one, it really depends on how far away it is and also what your fabric is like. I could just go ahead and start a bead over here, because it's not that far away. You're just going to think on the wrong side you're going to have all these threads going across. So if you're actually working with a sheer fabric, it might look kind of bad. So if I'm just doing an individual bead like this and I want to do another one, let's say over here, maybe tie a knot on the back of this one, cut your thread and start again. It's time consuming, but it'll look the nicest. So here's another option you can do. So I'm going to come up again. I'm going to do another safety or anchor stitch. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of my fabric. I go through the loop. You want to make sure that your thread's not too long because it can get caught on things. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, if I can, one sequin. So I have my sequin on my needle here, and then I'm going to grab a bead as well. So it'll look a little fancier. I'm going to pull this all the way through. And then I'm just going to move this bead out of the way and just go through the middle of the sequin. So the bead is going to be secured on top. And that's another way to do just an individual. So there I have a bead on top. And if you want, you can go through it again, just like we did with this one. But if that's all I was going to do, I can go ahead, tie a knot, and you can see that's how you sew on just an individual bead. Next, I'm going to show you how to incorporate beads into a running stitch. This is a very simple way to do it, especially if you're doing a line or an outline of some kind. So I start off the same way. I do my anchor stitch on the right side. I already actually have a bead on here to start with. So I'm going to go down a little ways away from where my thread came out. I'm going to pull this all the way through. So there's my first one. And then you're going to put a stitch pretty close next to that in the direction that you want to sew. So you're creating a line here. You don't want there to be that much of a gap. So I'm just trying to find a placement there. It looks pretty good. So I'm going to pull it all the way through. I'm going to grab another bead. And then I'm going to go back down a little ways from where my thread came out. And there's my next one. And I'm going to do one a little ways from that. Grab a bead, go back down. So you're just going up and down through the fabric, and each time you come up and you're on the right side, you're going to grab a bead and you're going to go a little ways away from that. And pretty soon you'll have a line of beads. And it's really up to you on how close you want to make your beads. So you can see they're pretty close, but they're not right next to each other. Now I'm going to demonstrate the bead back stitch. So I start off the same way, anchor stitch. Now I'm going to grab a series of beads. It can really be 1, 3, 5, whatever you want. I'm actually doing 5. So I have 5 individual beads on here. I'm going to line them up to wherever direction I want them to go. And then I'm going to go down in the fabric. Now this is the part where you have to be tricky. If I put it down too close to my stitch, what can happen is my beads will be pushed upwards and they won't lie flat. If I do it too far away, then my beads will have all this room to move around. So you want to be pretty accurate to get it close, but not too close or too far. So I'm going to go down there. I'm going to bring it through. I'm going to come up again, but I'm going to come up, it's really up to you. You can come up behind the last bead. You see my needles between the second to last and last bead. Or if you're doing 5, you can come up here between the 3rd and 4th bead. So I'm going to do that. Pull it all the way through. Go through the last 2 beads. And now I can go ahead and grab some more beads. So I can grab 3, 5. I mean, it's just a little bit quicker than doing the running stitch because you're grabbing so many beads at once. So I went ahead, grabbed 5 more, and then I'm just going to do the exact same thing again. So I'm going to put it through, I'm going to go through just past them, and then I'll go through the last 2 or 1 bead. Next, we're going to go over couching beads. Now this one's a little trickier because you're actually utilizing 2 needles. You can see I have 1 needle here with my thread. I already put some beads onto my thread here, and they're not secured at all. It's just some beads on there. And there's no set number I think I just put about 10 on there. Then I put my needle into my fabric and I wrapped my excess thread around it just to hold it into place. So I'm going to grab my other needle now. And this is already threaded, it already has a knot. And what's going to happen is I'm going to come up from underneath past this first bead here. So I'm just showing you on the right side before I actually do it. So I'm going to come up about here and I'm just pull these other beads over the way. I'm just going to stitch over my original thread. So I'm going to do a stitch like this. Then I'm going to move my next bead over and I'm going to do another stitch going across just the thread. And you're going to do it past each individual bead. You can probably do 2 beads at a time if you want, but what it does, it helps you get a little bit more flexibility on how you want the strand of bead to go. So by doing a little shaping at a time, if you want to do more of a curve or more of a shape, it gives you more control in doing that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to come up from behind, right past that first bead. And you want to make sure you're coming really close to your line because we don't want to have these huge stitches going across. And then I'm going to go down right on the other side of it. And then I'm going to go on the next spot. Should move this bead down because I don't want it to be too far away. And then I'm going to come up again. And then I'm going to go down. Now, once I get to the end, I can go ahead, take my first needle off, string some more beads, and then repeat the process again. The lazy stitch is next, and it's one of my favorites just because I really like the name. So starting off the same way, I put a number of beads onto my fabric. It's really up to you on how many you want to do. I'm doing 5. We're going to start off kind of the same way as we did the back stitch. So I'm going to go down next to my last bead here, pull it all the way through, and you want to make sure again that your beads are lying flat and they're not all sticking up because they're too close together. All right, then I'm going to go up just a little ways away from that last bead, but I'm not coming at the end of it, I'm just moving a little ways next to it. Okay, then I'm going to grab some more beads. I'm just going to go ahead and grab 5 so it'll kind of look like I'm doing a square. I'm going to put this all onto my thread, move it down into place, and I'm going to go this way. So this stitch is really good for filling, like if you're trying to fill in an area and you just want a bunch of quick strands of beads together. So for the next one, if I need to make it a little bigger, I'm going to come up right next to that second row and do the same thing. So I'm going to put 5 beads on that and then come over on this way here. So then you'll see you'll get a condensed area of beads. The last thing I'm going to show you is how to create a beaded fringe. Now, of course, fringe is made up of strands of beads, and I'm going to show you how to do one of them, but once you do one, you'll know how to do them all. So for this one, what you're going to do is you're going to start off the same way. You're going to have some beads on there, and they can be of different sizes. It can be whatever length you want. The length is determined by how many beads you put on here and then how big the beads are. So I have all my beads, they're just loose on the string here. I'm going to go back through all my beads except for this last one right here. I'm going to skip that one, but go through all the other ones. So this part is a little tricky to make sure that you actually don't skip any. All right, so that looks pretty good. Also, what you want to be careful is you do not pull this thread too tight, because I found that if you pull it really tight, what happens is your fringe, instead of dangling down, which is what you want, it ends up sticking straight up and straight out of the fabric, which doesn't look good. So that looks pretty good. So here we have a nice little fringe. And this bead on the end is what's holding everything into place there. Then I'm just going to go back down through my fabric. Again, don't pull it too tight. And then if I want to go ahead and start another one, I can go ahead and do that. So these are great for putting at the bottom hemline or actually putting it throughout your garment. So you get a little bit of a shimmying effect. So there's definitely other different techniques you can use for putting on beads onto clothes, but these are a few basic ones to help you get started. New tutorials are released weekly, so please subscribe to be notified of the next release. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 200 sewing video tutorials, including our exclusive premium content. Our premium membership is only $5 a month for unlimited access and only available at ProfessorPincushion.com. Also, don't forget to download our mobile app for videos on the go. Thanks for watching.